flood, when there was a high oxygen environment everywhere, everything grew very, very much bigger. Humans and animals and plants were much larger before Noah's flood. Here is a dragonfly, and it's got a 50-inch wingspan. That's a fossilized dragonfly found in Italy. Can you imagine a dragonfly flying around in your sitting room 50 inches across? That would frighten the life out of me. Don't know about you. Now, cockroaches, fossilized cockroaches, they found fossil cockroaches 18 inches long. Can you imagine what it would feel like to have a cockroach 18 inches long coming out of the cupboard underneath your kitchen sink? Fossils of grasshoppers have been found over 2 feet long. That would be huge. Can you imagine looking out onto your garden and seeing a 2-foot-long grasshopper? Well, that's what the fossil record actually shows. So maybe we'd have to go on a grasshopper hunt. They found fossilized giant tarantula, great big spiders, 1 foot long. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that scuttling across your floor as you're watching this now? Now, grass, all vegetation was very large, was enormous. Here's some fossilized cattails, and they found in the fossil record that cattails have been found 60 feet high. Can you imagine that? Grass 60 feet high in the sedimentary rock. And here is, standing next to Dr. Kent Hovind, is a 12-foot tortoise. Can you imagine going to the seaside and seeing a 12-foot tortoise? Well, you're going to ask, what about dinosaurs? Well, let's talk about dinosaurs. The Bible does talk a lot about, doesn't talk about so much about dinosaurs, because that was a word which was invented in about 1860, round about there. The Bible talks about dragons and behemoth, and this is what it says in Job chapter 40. Look now at the behemoth which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, and his ribs like bars of iron. Now, there has been a theory that actually, what actually killed off the dinosaurs was actually when they emerged after the flood, 4,400 years ago, there was much less oxygen, and they were simply not very well adapted to the low oxygen environment. Now, here's just a drawing of an 80-foot-long Apatosaurus, also known as a Brontosaurus. And if you go to the Natural History Museum in London and look at the skeleton, you'll find that the skeleton of an Apatosaurus or a Brontosaurus has very, very small nostrils, about the same size of as a horse. Now, how can this be? Well, very simply, before the flood, dinosaurs lived in a very, very high oxygen environment, but after the flood, they were in terrible trouble because their nostrils were simply not well adapted for breathing in a low oxygen environment. Now, I don't know if you've heard about, in England we talk about St. George and the dragon. And dragons, not much is known about them, but one thing is known about them is they're very large and they breathe fire. Now, I want you to imagine a dinosaur living in a low oxygen environment with huge, great lungs, about the size possibly of the room you're in right now, breathing through tiny, tiny little nostrils, which were not adapted for a low oxygen environment. Well, what would happen as that poor dinosaur was breathing heavily in and out through those very narrow nostrils? Well, I'll tell you what would happen is the nostrils would catch on fire, and maybe that's how we get legends of fire-breathing dragons. They're simply dinosaurs which are having trouble breathing and cause their nostrils to come alight and breathe out fire. Now, there are still actually dinosaurs around the world. In 1959, a missionary in the Congo said that 2 pygmies had killed what they called a Mekele Mbembe. And there's a drawing which they made of the Mekele Mbembe, and it looks to me very much like a dinosaur. This sea creature was caught off the coast of New Zealand in 1977. It weighed 4,000 pounds and was found at 900 feet deep. And I don't know what you think. It doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before. I think it probably is a dinosaur. Let's now talk about fossils, and let's really talk about fossils. Now, I want you to be real about this. I want you to get a very large animal. You can get an elephant, or a rhinoceros, or anything you like, and wait till it's dead and put it on a field or a cricket pitch somewhere near you. And go back after a week, and let me tell you, you're going to get a very nasty smell. After about 3 months, if you go back, you're going to get a rotting carcass and a lot of bones. After about a year, you're going to come back and find a pile of bones, and that's all you can find. If you can find a dinosaur and do it with a dinosaur, you're going to find the same thing. Let me tell you something. In World War II, there were about 60 million people, sadly, died in World War II. There isn't a single fossilized military or civilian person who's fossilized as following World War II. Now, there's only one way you can make a fossil. There's only one real way to make a fossil, and that's to preserve it instantly in hundreds of tons of rock. And that's what happened at Ner's flood. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you with a couple of pictures. Here is a fossil of a fish. Look very carefully at that fish. That fish is hungry. And that fish is eating a small fish. Can you see that? That big fish is eating a small fish. And let me tell you, that did not happen over millions of years. No, 4,400 years ago there was a flood, and that fish was buried under tons and tons of debris and rock when the foundations of the great deep broke up and the crust of the earth was dumped on millions and millions of fish and animals and dinosaurs. And here is a fossilized dinosaur. It's called an ichthyosaur. That ichthyosaur was fossilized instantly in a moment of time. How do I know that? I also know it's a lady dinosaur. How do we know that? Because that lady dinosaur is actually giving birth. Look very carefully and you'll be able to see that that dinosaur is giving birth to a little baby dinosaur. And that didn't happen in millions of years either. That happened in a moment of time at the flood 4,400 years ago. There's only one time in history when fossils can actually be made. Now, the creation of planet Earth is a scientific miracle. It happened 6,000 years ago, and it was a complete miracle. You see, there's the Earth suspended in space. There are millions and millions of parameters that must be perfect for life to survive on planet Earth. And this is an example of what's called irreducible complexity. There are lots and lots of parameters that have to be satisfied: the temperature, the rotation period of the Earth, the oxygen content, the CO2 content, the magnetic field, the gravitational field, the food available for mankind, fresh water available for mankind, shielding from X-rays, gamma rays, and from outer space, and millions of other parameters. Let me tell you, these are all interdependent parameters, and it would be quite impossible for these finely tuned parameters to evolve by chance. Now, let's look now at the calendars in existence. They're all less than 6,000 years old, which is a strange thing considering this Earth is supposed to be 4 billion years old. Let's look at the Hebrew calendar. The year 2009 is the year 5769 in the Hebrew calendar. Well, why is that? Why is the oldest calendar on the planet only 5,609 years old? Why? What about the Chinese calendar? This year is the year 4,706 on the Chinese calendar. Why? Why are these comparatively small numbers? Why are the oldest reliable historical records less than 6,000 years old? I'll tell you why. It's because the whole planet's only 6,000 years old. What about carbon dating? Aren't dinosaurs supposed to be millions of years old? That's what you're told in the Natural History Museum. Now, I'm not going to have time to explain in this short teaching in 57 minutes all about carbon dating, but it's all on our website, finalfrontier.org.uk and freechristianteaching.org. But I want to tell you just the basics of it. It's all to do with the element carbon.